Touchdown, Florida State. Hey, Seminole fans, it's time for another edition of the Osceola Podcast.
Hey, this is Jerry Kutz with an Osceola podcast featuring Gene Deckerhoff. Gene, welcome to the show.
Touchdown FSU, Jerry. Touchdown Florida State. I like saying that.
How many times have you said it now?
2070, Jerry. I started a touchdown counter about 12 years ago, and it's amazing. We were playing Arizona State, and our alumni affairs director, Jim Melton, and I were having a bite to eat. He said, "Hey, Gino, how many times do you think you've said touchdown FSU or something similar?" I said, Jim, I don't know. I've never thought about it, but I can go back into the press guides and I can count up the number of touchdowns. And since I've done all the games, that'll be the number. And so that goes back to the mid-'80s, I think it was, when he asked me that question. And I just sort of kept on adding to it. And then I started a little website that I don't update very often. I should, but I update the touchdown counter. And when I sign autographs, at the Willie Tiger talk show or at football games or at speaking engagements and everything, I always put voice and then the touchdown count. So it's always different. This cool. Last week after the 5 touchdowns against Louisville, it's Gene Deckerhoff voice and 2070.
Well, Gene, you're going to broadcast your 500th Florida State sporting event this weekend. Against North Carolina State. Can you believe it? 500 broadcasts.
No, it's an incredible, when you think about it, I mean, where did all this time go by? 1979, Bill Peterson was in the booth with me, the late Bill Peterson, the head football coach at Florida State for 11 years. I enjoyed working with Coach Pete, and then he took the job down in Orlando as the athletic director at the University of Central Florida. And Vic Prinzi started in 1981. Vic and I worked together through 1997. He came down with cancer and passed away that January of 1998. And then P.T. Willis joined me on the booth. And P.T. worked 10 years, and now it's William Barnum Floyd. Chop it up, Seminoles. It's been, Jerry, it's been a great run. I've worked with some great people, and I learned something. Every time I do a broadcast with all of the fellows that I've worked with, I learned something new and unique about the game of football. It holds true on Sunday afternoons when I work with Dave Moore on Buccaneers broadcast. It's unique. I never played football, Jerry, but I've always been a student of the game and tried to learn as much as I can. And not to get too technical because, everybody's not a football expert. So I think maybe my knowledge is more like the generic knowledge of the game, and it's not so, it's not a John Gruden playbook, in other words.
Yeah. Gene, let's talk about those colorful characters. I mean, you begin with Pete and then Vic Prinzi, and a lot of our listeners know about them or have read about them, but don't know them as intimately as you got to know them. Would you share a little bit about not just those two guys, but PT and Floyd as well? What that's been like?
Yeah, it's going back to Coach Pete. He had a way with the language. I'll promise you that. One time we were playing Memphis. Memphis State at the time, and now Memphis, but we're playing at Memphis, and it was a TV game, and it started at 11 o'clock Central Time. I don't know why it was such an early start, but Coach Pete had come up with a couple of his buddies. They'd come up in a motorhome, an RV, and Pete's talking about his trip up. Yeah, he says, I came up with some of my good friends, and all of a sudden he just stops talking. He's staring out. He couldn't remember the names of the guys he'd come up with. He just looked over to me, and he sort of had that smile. Said, well, we had a good time. And he loved to smoke cigars, and he had cigars. And one time I looked over at Pete, and his eyes were closed, and this is a bit of a game, and the stogie had a big old long ash on it. I sort of tapped him on the shoulder when he popped up his head. The ash fell down all over him, but oh golly, those were the days. And I'll never forget, Paul Porowski was a great linebacker. He and Reggie Herring were great linebackers, inside linebackers for us. We had that 50 defense, so you had 2 linebackers, but Porowski's a tough name for any of us to say, but he always called it Perspicowski. I don't know where that came from. But that was Pete. And then Vic Prinzi was saying, oh, my, and my, a long time before anybody else was saying it. And you could always tell him, Gino, my man, let me tell you why this is going to work and all that. I mean, he honestly was my my best friend in life, and we traveled an awful lot. We did a lot of football games together, and he and I also did USFL football together. So we were doing about 30 games a year. And when I'd go to Tampa on business, I'd stay at Vic's house and not at a hotel, and we'd go out and have dinner. And I'd invite Vic to come over to the beach when I'd do a Buccaneer game, and every now and then we'd get together after a Bucs game. And then when he was dying of cancer, after every Bucs game, I'd go by and visit with Vic. But anyway, that was a great relationship, and he taught me a lot about Florida State football, and also was very instrumental in getting his good friend Burt Reynolds to do Great Moments in Florida State football for the Bobby Bowden TV show, and the original episodes of Great Moments of Florida State football always had Vic and Burt together, and it was a tough decision when Vic passed away. I did a season with just Burt doing it by himself, but he was a lot better at bouncing stuff back and forth. So the following year, I started doing Great Moments with Burt, and that's the way we did it for 26 years. But that's I owe Victor that one. P.T. Willis, I see you, Jimmy Jones, or whatever, when he first started saying that became a trademark symbol of P.T., and P.T. Willis was a tremendous analyst when it came to offenses versus defenses, and I learned an awful lot from P.T. He still loves FSU, even though he's not doing the broadcast. He had a chance to watch his sons play sports at the high school level, and that was another reason why, leaving the broadcast booth with me, it probably was better for his family and to watch him see his sons grow. And then William Barnard Floyd, boy, he makes that trip up from Orlando every Friday night, does the game on Saturday, and he's got so much energy. I love listening to the broadcast. I listen to every broadcast and try to get better. And I love listening to William. He gets really, really pumped up. So I've learned a lot of football. I've had some great relationships with the fellows I've worked with in the booth. Two are gone now. Bill passed away and Vic passed away, but P.T. and William Barnard Floyd, we're still hanging out together.
It's interesting you talk about, when you mentioned Floyd, that was the first thing I thought of was energy. And when you talk about a knowledge of the game, one thing I've noticed about you that I wanted to share with the readers is the amount of time and preparation you put into a broadcast. For a lot of people, it sounds easy that you're just sitting right next to them calling it. But, Gene, how much time do you put into preparation for a game?
Well, I do 2 games a week, and there's about 12 to 16 hours of prep. If you count looking at video, you count listening back to your broadcast the previous week, you count making and creating your depth charts, and then putting individual notes. By the way, the depth charts, Jerry, are always available on GeneDeckerhoff.com. They're free. You can download them, and if you see any mistakes, let me know, because there always are. The college game, you don't realize how many people change numbers, it seems like. So I start building depth charts in February and March. I mean, I go that far back. When the spring guides come out, I start building college depth charts, and I pull down the final PR releases for the NFL teams that the Bucs are going to play, and start building the matchups. And that's where you compare stats and all that, and historical things like, the last 3 games you played against this team and that. And so you start doing it in February. So I guess if you condense it all, when you start in February and March, by the way, that's during basketball season. So what does Gene do when he's traveling with the basketball team? He's working on football depth charts. And you know the teams you're going to play in the NFL. You know the teams you're going to play in college. The schedules are already set. So you get the head start on that. And if you don't get that head start, Jerry, you're never, ever going to get caught up, because once the seasons start, I mean, it's incredible. And then in November, you get the overlap of college basketball, and basketball season starts November the 6th this year. We play at Pittsburgh, so you've got 2 games at 16 hours apiece, say average. That's 32, and then you got at least 6 hours or 4 to 6 hours for basketball games. So you're looking at 32 and 4, 30. You're looking at 36 hours just in preparation, not counting travel. In actual broadcast time on game day for a football game, I park my little van RV up. I park it at the stadium 3 hours before kickoff, and head to the press box an hour and a half before kickoff. And then after the game, you go down to the locker room and you do the post game interview with Coach Taggart. You're spending about 7.5, 8 hours at the stadium on game day, and it's not quite that many hours on on a Buccaneers broadcast because I leave from Tallahassee. If you count the travel, it is because it's 4.5 hours down, 4.5 hours back on Monday, and then I get to the stadium. We leave at 6 a.m., 6:05 a.m., and arrive at the stadium at 10:35, and go up and do the scene setter at noon, play-by-play at 1, done by 4, over to the hotel by 5, and dinner, and then watch the Sunday night game while you update stats, and then it starts all over again. But that's a typical weekend for football. This, by the way, I've done 496 regular season NFL Buccaneer football games, and if you add the preseason games in there, Jerry, it's 619. So a lot of football games have been broadcast since 1979.
We hope you've enjoyed the first segment of this podcast. To hear the entire episode, as well as past and future podcasts and daily coverage of Seminole sports, please subscribe to the Osceola at theosceola.com. Sign up today and enjoy a free 1-week trial subscription. Try us. You can rely on us.